Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Pink 'Un. The transfer activity continues at Carrow Road, and I'm delighted to be joined by Ryan McGinlay from our colleagues up at the Celtic Way in Scotland. And today we're discussing not Yang Hyun Jun, despite any of the pictures that may or may not be out there and may or may not be AI created, but instead Jeffrey Schlupp, who spent, of course, the second half of last season on loan at Celtic from Crystal Palace and now looks set to join the Canaries as a free agent. We're speaking before the deal's been confirmed, but we're led to believe that it is very likely to happen, and expecting him to be joining Liam Manning's promotion push in short order. First of all, Ryan, thanks very much for joining us. And if we start with sort of your general reflections on Jeffrey Schlupp's time at Celtic and how he was sort of viewed up there.
Yeah, I would say it was a mostly solid loan spell from Crystal Palace. Celtic were originally linked with the player the summer before, so that
Yeah.
would have been summer 2024, but they couldn't get a deal sorted. They ended up going for Alex Bailly, who was in the Barcelona setup, who's now at Como, who Celtic could be playing in a couple of days' time. They're in the Como Cup at the time of recording, of course. Yeah, so they went with Bailly, but Bailly then moved to Como in January, and they were on the lookout for another left back. They knew that Kieran Tierney was coming in the summer. That was a pre-contract that was agreed between Arsenal and Celtic, but they needed somebody else to sort of take that role that Alex Bailly had vacated. And there was a couple of links with different players, but Jeffrey Schlupp would come in on deadline day from Crystal Palace. We knew that he was out of contract at the end of the season at Crystal Palace, so it made sense for him, a sort of 6 month or 5 6 month audition period for him to sort of earn his next move, because he wasn't going to be playing at Crystal
Yeah.
Palace. I think on the whole it was a positive loan, a very different player to Greg Taylor, who he was competing with for the left back slot, who's now at PAOK in Greece. More Probably more of a conventional left back than Greg Taylor, who liked to play more as an inverted fullback, and come into the play. Jeffrey Schlupp is versatile; he can play in that midfield position as well, but he was seen as more of a defensive minded, run of the mill left back. Despite his versatility, he was played as that sort of traditional role, whereas Greg Taylor was used when the club needed an inverted fullback, because the right back was usually Alistair Johnson, and he plays as a traditional right back as well. So on the whole, it was a positive loan. Some good performances, some standout performances, but then a couple that maybe he didn't do himself justice. But on the whole, pretty much a solid loan given the circumstances.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned sort of the defensive qualities, because I think probably what most Norwich fans will remember Schlupp from most is when he was part of that Leicester team that won the Premier League, and of course he
Yeah.
was playing as a winger at the time. So could you see those abilities as well, or do you feel almost like he's maybe over a bit of time adapted as a player to become slightly more defensive?
I don't think he's the player that he was 9, 10 years ago.
Yeah,
And that in terms of his pace, he's still a very pacey player, but he's maybe not got that breakout pace that you might have watched him, or you viewed him at Leicester and Crystal
yeah,
Palace. That pace, maybe he's lost that half yard, but he's still very quick on his feet. He still does have those attacking qualities. He scored a lovely goal outside the box against St Mirren in the Scottish Premiership as Celtic were going for the title. But it was more his defensive abilities that were shown, both positively and negatively, at his time at Celtic. I think if I was to point out one game that he did really well, it was against Bayern Munich in the Champions League, where he came up against his former Crystal Palace teammate Michael Elise, who was playing for Bayern Munich in his first season. The two of them had a really good battle between each other, and a lot of the time Jeffrey Schlupp got the better of his
yeah.
ex teammate, and that's no mean feat. I mean, we watched what Elise can do both in the Bundesliga, Champions League, and in the Club World Cup this summer, and Schlupp kept him relatively quiet, which wasn't the case the previous week when Greg Taylor played against him. He was largely at fault for the first goal that Elise scored. So yeah, that was a standout game for him. In terms of a negative game, probably the Glasgow Derby or Old Firm, whatever term you want to use with regard to that game. Um, he was beaten in the air by a player that was much smaller than him. And that really set the tone for the rest of the game. So positives and negatives, but one thing I've got to say is that he's a total professional, and he'll never give you less than 100% on the pitch.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that side of his game, because I think
Mhm.
looking at some quotes from Brendan Rodgers from a couple of months ago, he really bigged up sort of Schlupp's qualities as a player or as a person as well as a player. Is that something that really stood out when he was playing for Celtic?
I think both on and off the pitch, you could see his personality. On the pitch, he was getting on with his teammates, hugging them after goals, being front and centre of all the goal celebrations. Off of it, he was really good in press conferences, and you could see that. Even in his debut press conference, he was talking about how happy he was to join Celtic, a winning team, a team that wins trophies near enough every season. And that's something that, despite he had that winning season at Leicester City, he's not had that for a lot of his career. A lot of the time he's been sort of battling relegation. He might even get a promotion push with Norwich this season, which might be one of the reasons why he's joining the club, because he does have that hunger for silverware. There's actually been quite a bit of talk in recent weeks, and I know by the time this video comes out he probably has signed for Norwich, that he could go back to Celtic, but I think the wages are probably the big stumbling block in that, because Celtic will already be paying big wages to the likes of Kieran Tierney and potentially somebody else coming in at left back. So despite that versatility that he gives across the pitch, you can probably see why Celtic haven't went back in for him, despite potentially being interested in his services once again.
Yeah, so do you think it's the sort of one where maybe if financially it made a little bit more sense, then Rodgers would have been happy to keep him at the club and Celtic would have been happy to keep him there? Yeah.
I think so, yeah. I think if Kieran Tierney wasn't coming back to Celtic and he wasn't back at Celtic, then I've got no doubt that probably that Jeff Schlupp would have signed for Celtic, but it was a bit of a stopgap between January and the summer, and that was all well and good. He made a lot of appearances for Celtic in that time, I believe 18 appearances. But it was always in the background that Kieran Tierney was coming back. Everybody knew that he was coming back to Celtic.
Yeah.
His boyhood team, the team that he's, injuries aside, he will be starting most games for Celtic. So it's a bit of a tough sell for somebody coming back to the club, even if it is on a free transfer, knowing that they'll likely be playing second fiddle to Kieran Tierney, which is a tough task.
Yeah, of course. And we've obviously had you on the channel before to speak about Idah, and you've seen that transition from the Championship to the Scottish Premiership and the other way around as well before. So as somebody who's seen Schlupp in close quarters in that league, obviously relatively recently, do you think he's still got the quality to play in the Championship and play for a team that wants promotion to the Premier League next season?
Without a doubt, and I think that's the reason why West Bromwich Albion were in for the player as well. Ryan Mason's clearly seen an experienced pro that could come back or drop down a division and play 30, 40, 50 games a season. I've got no doubt he can do that for Norwich. He's a good player. He's played in the Champions League, so there's no doubt he can play in the Championship. Just a consummate professional and somebody that you can rely on. No injuries to speak of when he was at Celtic. He was pretty much available, although Celtic rotated between him and Greg Taylor. Obviously, Greg Taylor was in the last 6 months of his deal as well, so there was that going on in the background. There's been quite a bit of uncertainty in that left-back position, even with Kieran Tierney coming back, because there's an acceptance that perhaps Tierney might not play every game due to his injury history, which is very sketchy, particularly at Arsenal in the latter stages, and at Sociedad too. So that second left-back position needs to be filled, and it remains to be seen where Celtic are going to go for that. They've brought in a player from Japan. Not sure if they're going to go back into the transfer market to maybe bring in somebody that's more experienced at left-back, but that remains to be seen. I thought it was going to be Jeffrey Schlupp for a little while, but as the weeks and months have rolled on, and West Brom have been interested, and then Norwich City have been interested, I've realised that his future probably lies elsewhere, and that's where his family are as well. They're down south, so it makes perfect sense for the player to continue his career down south where he's known.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we've spoken about a few different positions. You referenced the fact that he can play sort of central midfield. We spoke about him playing on the wing for Leicester, and it does feel like every time you look at what people are saying about Schlupp and throughout his career, versatility has been a sort of theme. But obviously, you've spoken mostly about the left back role. It feels like that's probably where he's going to provide the most cover for Norwich. Did you see any signs of his versatility at Celtic, or was it mainly just in that left-back position?
It was quite interesting because he played only left-back at Celtic. Now, he was playing as a traditional left-back. What was interesting is that sometimes Greg Taylor and Jeffrey Schlupp were playing at the same time on the pitch when Celtic were a little bit stretched in terms of that position. So Greg Taylor actually played as a deep-line midfielder and or the deepest of the three midfielders, and Jeffrey Schlupp would stay at left back. You never really seen Schlupp playing that midfield role, which people had talked about. That versatility was spoke about when he joined the club, but you never did see that in action. It was more Greg Taylor that was trusted because he was used to that inverted role. I've got no doubt he'll probably be more versatile at Norwich, given the amount of games that are played in a short period of time. He can come into centre back, he can play left back, can play midfield as well, even further forward on occasion. But I think you'll predominantly see him as a left back. I think that's where he's most suited, and that's where Celtic get the best results from, or the only results, because that's the only area that he played for Celtic. As much as we talked about the versatility, he never got the chance to show that at Celtic because he was used exclusively as a left back alongside Greg Taylor.
Indeed, it will be interesting to see which role he plays at Norwich. But just finally, I wanted to touch on that man I spoke about earlier, Idah, and I think Norwich fans will be interested to hear how he sort of gets on. I'm sure they've been looking at the stats from time to time and things like that. I think since he became a permanent Celtic player, he's probably done okay. But do you feel like he's yet to hit the heights maybe of that initial loan spell?
I think a lot of the support will be hoping that he can hit higher heights than what he has done so far. Now, he has had good moments. He scored in the Glasgow derby against Rangers in the last derby of the season to equalise for Celtic at Ibrox, so that was a high moment for him. He also played a massive role in Celtic getting to the playoff stage of the Champions League after the league phase. He pressured the young boys defender into making a critical error, which turned out to be the only goal in that game that essentially sealed their qualification. So he's had big moments. The only problem is these moments have come few and far between. I also need to mention the double that he scored against Aston Villa at Villa Park, which, although it ended up in a defeat for Celtic, it brought them back to 2 each and they were well in that game going into the second half. So the highs are really high with Idah, I would say, and when those moments are there, you can see that he's got that undoubted quality when leading the line. But very temperamental player, a player that can go up and down quite easily. When he's anonymous, you kind of know he's anonymous in games, and that's why Celtic will sometimes go for the likes of Idah through the middle, who's predominantly a left winger, but he can play through the middle. They've just signed a new Japanese player, Shin Yamada, as well, so he'll be competing. There's also a couple of other forward options that are getting touted, so it's a big season for Idah, a big price tag. He can't control the price tag, we know that, but there will be that undoubted pressure going into his second season. He's had a full pre-season of work now under Brendan Rodgers. That's got to be mentioned when you talk about his efforts last season, because it was a very disrupted pre-season at Norwich, as you'll remember. But the second season, it's going to be massive for him. I don't want to say make or break, but I think it'll go a long way to deciding how well he does in his Celtic career this next 12 months. So hopefully he can take it with both hands and feet.
Yeah, let's hope so. It'll be interesting to see how he gets on. Thanks very much for joining us, Ryan. Before I let you go, I'll give you an opportunity to plug. I'm going to guess your sale going on, because obviously we both work for the same company. We at the Pink 'Un have got a sale. So if you haven't already taken that up, I think it's £15 for the year. So go to pinkun.com/subscribe to find out more about that. And Ryan, I'm assuming you've got something similar on the Celtic Way for any Celtic fans we've got watching.
Well, currently we've got £1 for 6 months at the moment. All you need to do is go to www.celticway.co.uk/subscribe. I know there's been quite a few links between Celtic and Norwich in the past. You think of players like Timu Pukki, Chris Sutton, even more recently. I think both teams have been in for Matthias Kvistgaarden, obviously. Obviously Norwich got that player after a couple of years of scouting by Celtic, so it'll be interesting to see how he does. And then you've obviously got those links to Yang as well. Don't know how real they are, but there seems to be a little bit of interest. I know that's kind of tailed off recently, but it could be something that Norwich potentially go in for towards the end of the window or in the weeks and months ahead. So yeah, there's plenty of links between the two sides, but www.celticway.co.uk/subscribe, £1 for 6 months, and get all your Celtic content there.
For those sort of surprises, you may as well subscribe to both. Thanks very much for joining us, Ryan, and thanks everyone for watching. I'm sure we'll see you again soon in this busy transfer window.